I built my e-commerce brand BottleKeeper to over 60 million in total sales with only 4 employees, then sold it to private equity all in just 8 years. We had no investors either. It was just a product my cousin invented on the beach and a set of systems that we created that allowed us to pretty much automate everything in the business. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through the full story behind this brand, the mistakes that we made, how I almost burned it to the ground a dozen or more times, and the things that I learned about what it takes to actually operate a profitable e-commerce business. Let's get into it. So what's funny is I did not always want to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to be a doctor since I was about 6. I started having these weird dreams about saving people on operating tables, and I went hard down that path of math and science. I went to college, got a crazy degree in molecular and cellular biology, and decided at the age of 20 that I did not want to be 35 years old with $500,000 in debt starting my life and career, which was the path that I was on. So instead of medicine, I went into an orthopedic device startup that right out of college, that was basically at the apartment phase of startup. And I went in as the first salesperson. So I was put in a really unique position to be able to build that business up and out from pretty near the ground floor. Now, the problem, there were a lot, is that this was a father, very patriarchal father, and 2 sons, family business. And if you've ever heard the adage that money is like an accelerant to whatever kind of person you are, if you are an incredibly nice, giving person, money can make you a much better version of that. If you're a greedy, maniacal, borderline sociopathic person, money makes you a much worse version of that. And unfortunately, this fell in that latter bucket. So I spent the better part of a decade getting to participate in building a company up and out, but it became big and heavy, and I expanded it to Southern California, and it just kept getting bigger and heavier. And about 10 years into that, we spun off a technology piece of the business dealing with health insurance reimbursement, and something magic happened. I got to see what efficiency looked like. Now, this health tech piece had a handful of people in cubicles executing documents, and it became bigger from a revenue standpoint than that now decade-old medical device company in its first 18 months of operations. And it was just a handful of people executing documents. So I had to create this very unique situation that forced them to buy me out of my position in that health tech company so I could move on and do something else. Coming out of that experience, this is 2013, Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week is alive and well and crushing the world. And I read that, and it created this very important light bulb moment to me. And that was that huge difference between a big, heavy company that were like 80 people in multiple states and delivery vehicles and warehouses and all this stuff. It was super heavy, really difficult to get away from. And then we had this tech piece that was dramatically more efficient. So I was able to compound that and or at least the ideas that I got from Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week going into the next stage, which was BottleKeeper. Now, BottleKeeper was invented in late 2012. It was my cousin Matt. He was sitting on the beach, drinking a beer out of a red party cup. You know the situation. The beer's warm in like 4.5 minutes, and he's a little bit of a maniac in the best possible way, where he wants to drink his Corona, specifically a Corona, at a specific temperature out of a bottle. And he's looking around and he sees people drinking out of water bottles all over the beach. And he has this idea, why can't I take one? I actually have a prototype. Why can't I take one of those stainless steel water bottles, hacksaw it in half, then stuff it with some neoprene, like college koozie material, and put my beer bottle inside of that to keep it cold and make it so that glass isn't a disaster on a beach. And that's really where the concept came from. Matt and I, we were very close. And over the course of the next 6 to 8 months, Matt was pushing me to get involved with this company called BottleKeeper. At that point, it was called Bottle Camo. That's a whole other story. But honestly, I looked at the product and I didn't believe that it was anything more than a Spencer's Gifts kind of thing, sort of a tchotchke that you buy for bachelor or bachelorette parties, and someone uses it 3 times and never gets used again. Now, that was my emotional response to that product. But I'm a scientist by mental and by training and with that crazy science degree. And Matt was as well. So I agreed to come along that journey with him under the guise that we could figure out whether or not people that weren't our moms and dads and aunts and uncles would pay a real price point for this product that would make it a business and not a Spencer's Gift tchotchke product. Strangers paying real money and swiping their credit cards to buy it. So we went down the path of I built a website, I shot a video, I literally duct taped a GoPro to the outside of that product, the outside of our prototype BottleKeeper that's a hacksaw marks on it and everything. And I shot a video out on the beach of me unscrewing the cap, and you can see the beer bottle, and taking a drink of it and putting it back down. And I popped up a website, and I spent $500 on Google AdWords and just collected emails. And enough people put in their emails when they saw that product that it was an interesting data point, but they weren't paying for it. So the next logical step for me was to try to figure out how to prove there was a real price point need for the product. So we used crowdfunding. This is an unbelievable way to try to get strangers to buy your product to prove out the concept. We did this with Fundable. We had set a goal that was really generally for a crowdfunding campaign was low, but again, the thesis for us was not to generate a lot of revenue necessarily. It was purely to prove that strangers that didn't know us and didn't know our families and weren't, within 1 or 2 points of separation from us would swipe their credit cards and click buy. So the goal that we set was $5,000. And over the course of a couple of months, we had some articles come out. We had this really amazing one in Gizmodo called How to Hide Your Beer from the Man, which was not what we were going for. That's why we changed the name of the company from Bottle Camo to BottleKeeper very, very early on. We ended up doing about 320% of our goal, something like that. It was over 15 grand. And that was the second big aha moment in the journey of BottleKeeper, is that we were able to get strangers around the country. Frankly, there were 5 or 6 different countries where people were pre-ordering this product before we had spent $1 trying to make it at a high enough price point that made this a business and not just a fun side project or hobby. But as we went on this adventure together, I was really clear. I did not want to build a company that had employees. I set that as a very early guardrail based on my experience and scar tissue of the last decade building a business that was really big and heavy that I could not get away from. Now, it could have been done better. There's no question about that. But the reality is when you have that kind of a weight sitting on a business, it just makes it so much more difficult. So Matt and I took the company and we basically split it in half. Matt was responsible for the manufacturing and the books and the finance stuff and the shipping and fulfillment of the product to the customer. So the things that the customer did not see. While I was responsible for all the things that the customer did see. I built the website, I wrote all the copy, I took all the videos, shot all the pictures. As we got into advertising, which becomes a big part of the story, I did all of the advertising, I managed all the campaigns. So the fact that we had put such a strict guardrail on the business early on, that we wanted 0 employees, forced me to solve problems in a completely different, unique way. Generally speaking, when we have things that come up in a business, we have a tendency to want to push people to solve that thing. And I would look at technology and systems and structure to solve that problem in a way that didn't require people, but without bottlenecking the business, in that we didn't want to keep it from being able to scale. And because we couldn't hire people, we had to automate everything. That constraint is actually what made the business scale. It forced us to build infrastructure that could run without us being involved in every single step. We shipped our first orders in January of 2014. And for the first several months, we were just fumbling around at $2,000 to $3,000 a month in revenue because we hadn't figured out how to sell the product, how to market the product. BottleKeeper was this kind of product that you had to see it in action. Otherwise, it just looked like a water bottle. So in the summer of 2014, something really important happened. Facebook launched their video ad platform, and it was the single biggest inflection point probably in the history of the company. I went out on the beach. I shot a video with my hands that come in and a camera propped up on a backpack. And all you literally see is my hands coming in, you see the product in action, and you immediately understand what the thing does. Before that, we had no way to show people what the product actually did. Certainly not at scale outside of just running into people outside. The issue is that static images don't tell the story. We had to have video. So when that video went live on Facebook in their ad platform, the business absolutely exploded. The reason it worked so well is because the video ads on Facebook back then were incredibly cheap. We were able to reach a massive audience for very little cost. So we went from, let's say, $2,000 a month in revenue to $20,000 to $40,000 to $80,000, and then we would just sell out a product. And this happened over and over and over for years. For context, in 2014, we did about $150,000 in revenue. In 2015, we did $1.8 million in revenue. 2016, we did over $8 million in sales, and we still had 0 employees. It was just me and Matt. We were reinvesting every nickel the business made back into the business, scaling past 8 million and the Shark Tank effect. At 8 million with 0 employees, customer service started to fall apart towards that end of the year. We had automated 95% of it because most of the questions are really the same 10 questions over and over and over. It's things like, where's my tracking number? I got green and now I want blue. Super simple stuff. And when we were getting 100 tickets a day, that 5% that we couldn't automate were no big deal. I could deal with them on my own in an hour. But when you're doing 2,000 or 3,000 orders in a day, that 5% is out of control. And that's what happened in Q4 of 2016. With a $30 price point, we sold a lot of product. So in 2017, we had to hire our first employee to take over customer service. That was the first time in the history of the company that we had brought somebody on from the outside. Around the same time, Shark Tank had been trying to get us on the show for years. A casting producer first reached out to us in 2015 after seeing one of our ads on Facebook. But we kept getting pushed into the next season and then the next season for all sorts of reasons. But by the time we actually ended up on the show in 2018, we were a dramatically different company than when they first reached out to us in 2015. So we ended up filming, which was very lucky, the week right before Father's Day of 2018. This was super lucky timing because that is one of the biggest sales period of the year, Father's Day and Christmas. So we got to walk into the tank and say some pretty insane numbers because we had literally done over $1 million in revenue in just the week leading up to that taping. So that was great, but the result was that the Sharks literally spent 47 of the 55 minutes just beating us up on not needing to be there. Mark Cuban's literal quote was something to the effect of, "You're either the worst business people in the world or you don't need to be here." Last 10 days and over 20 million in the last 3 years.
No way.
Yes, Frank.
So either you guys are the world's worst business people or you don't need us. So why are you here?
This is our first time building a business. We did end up getting what we asked for, doing a deal with both Mark and Lori for 5% of the company for $1 million. That episode aired on December 3rd in 2018, right at the beginning of the holidays, which was massive for us. We did over $1 million in revenue that we could directly attribute to that airing within the first week. Then that episode aired again in January, and then it moves to CNBC and it airs probably every other month forever through today. It's basically free customer acquisition. That year, we did a little over 13 million in revenue, and I think we had 3 team members. Now, to be transparent, the deals with Mark and Lori didn't end up going through. Lori only wanted to put us on QVC. Mark had some structural thing that was going to cost us $500,000 in taxes. But the thing is, when you do a deal on TV, you know nothing about them. They know nothing about you. A lot changes in that due diligence process. And those are some of the things that we uncovered. But honestly, it didn't matter because the exposure was the absolute real win. The mistake that made us lose money for the first time. So here I am coming off the best year that the company had ever had. We literally printed money for as lean as we were operating. Over 13 million in revenue. Our margins were incredible. Shark Tank exposure, it literally is just like paying dividends. It just keeps going and going and going. And this is where I made the biggest mistake of my entire time running BottleKeeper. I violated my own principles around operating lean. And it's not like we didn't know the math. Our entire system was built on these insane spreadsheets and crazy math that Matt and I had written because we were trying to operate the business profitably. We didn't have investors from the standpoint of doing the paid media and building the website and doing the email and doing all those things that I was directly controlling. These systems informed us how to set ad budgets, where our performance metrics needed to be, what kind of ROAS we need to have in order to hit our net margin goals and our profit and all those things that are super important. I had all of this information and I still made the wrong call. I literally didn't listen to it. What I did is I went and I added a bunch of team members and I opened a super fancy office that was awesome and had this killer roof deck, but it was completely unnecessary. All of those things added a boatload of fixed expenses to the business. And when you add fixed expenses without knowing exactly how your revenue and ROAS need to respond to pay for them, that's where you get into trouble. And that's literally exactly what happened in 2019. This was the first year in the history of the company that BottleKeeper lost money. We had made over $1.5 million net profit dollars in 2018. And in 2019, we did the same amount of revenue, but gave it all back. I had to lay off all those people that I hired and really liked. I had to get rid of the super awesome office. I had to get lean and go back to our baseline principles of operating an e-commerce business. It was super painful, but frankly, entirely my fault. And here's the thing. I knew better. I had the data. As I mentioned, it was all telling me exactly what the business needed, and I just ignored it. I thought we could grow out of it. But most founders don't even have the data. Most e-commerce operators are setting ad budgets based on what they're comfortable spending or losing, not based on what the math says the business actually needs to get to break even or be profitable. They're doing things like running discounts without understanding how those discounts need to perform to not be an absolute disaster. They're adding expenses without knowing how the revenue needs to increase and at what margin in order to actually pay for those expenses. And that's actually one of the main reasons I ended up building my current company, Pentane. But I'll get to that in a minute. The exit and what came next. After cutting all that weight for my mistakes, we were lean and efficient again going into 2020. And then COVID hit. Now, COVID was awful for most of the world, but for our business specifically, our fulfillment centers happened to be in states that weren't getting shut down like Texas and Florida, so we could still ship while big companies couldn't. And because those companies pulled back all of their ad spend across all of the ad networks, CPMs, or cost to reach 1,000 people on Facebook, got really, really inexpensive. That was our main marketing channel. The result is that the business ended up doing quite well in that period. And by this point, we had also built up a massive patent portfolio. What started as one provisional patent that Matt filed when he first invented the product in 2012 had grown to 42 patents by the time we got acquired. By the end, we basically owned the intellectual property around putting a container inside of another metal container. That portfolio was a huge piece of the value in that business, and it's largely what ended up driving our acquisition in combination with the value of the brand. We had companies reaching out about buying BottleKeeper for years, probably once a month, though a lot of them were spam. We never listened because the business was making money and giving us flexibility. But by 2020, the company had grown past the stage we enjoyed. I was spending most of my time dealing with attorneys on patent infringement issues, not being creative and not building new things and all of that. I was not doing any of the stuff that I actually enjoyed doing inside of that company. So Matt and I were both ready for the next chapter. It was then that an investment bank reached out with interest in having one of their clients acquire our company, and we started listening. We got far down the path, and then a private equity group called WindPoint Partners showed up. They had just acquired a large outdoor brand called Arctic Outdoors, so BottleKeeper was a perfect fit amongst their portfolio. We were able to get both those companies to compete with each other, which gave us massive leverage. That competitive dynamic was huge from a negotiation standpoint, but we had our own non-negotiable rules for this deal too. We wanted 100% buyout, completely out, no dragging along with a 5% stake and a 4-year earnout. So the acquisition closed in March of 2021. I stayed on through the end of the year to integrate BottleKeeper into Arctic's infrastructure, and then it was done. It was clean, we were out, it was really straightforward, and there were 4 employees at the time of the sale. After that, I took some time off. I did a lot of nothing, to be honest. I built my daughter a bed, I got super into woodworking, I remodeled some stuff in my house, and then I started consulting a couple brands that my wife and I had invested in. One was a $20 million a year business that was profitable, and I realized very quickly that they had no idea how to actually make money. By all typical metrics, they were doing absolutely fine. But when I looked under the hood, they had no idea which levers to pull and how to pull them in order to dramatically impact and improve profitability. They were doing things like setting ad budgets arbitrarily, just making them up. They had no idea how their ROAS needed to change if they ran a discount or if they increased their prices, and they couldn't tell you what happened to the net margin if they hired 2 more people. So I built systems inside those companies similar to what I had used at BottleKeeper, but much more refined, and it completely changed their business. One company that was already doing $1 million a year in net profit increased by 50% the following year, all from just understanding how contribution margin works and how to use that information to make better decisions. Then I advised a turnaround for a company that was losing $100,000 a month with a couple of months of cash left. I used the exact same approach. I built the system that told them they needed to spend 3 times the amount of ad budget and that their ROAS needed to come down from 6 to 2.5. They went from losing $100,000 a month to making $40,000 a month in just 3 months. And that's when I knew this needed to be more than just spreadsheets and systems. I could only help 3 companies at a time doing it manually, but I didn't want to help 3 companies. I wanted to help 3,000 companies. So I took everything that I learned across the 8+ years of building and scaling BottleKeeper, and I built my company Pentane. All the systems, all the math, all the mistakes that I learned in BottleKeeper went straight into that product. It's a SaaS platform that connects to your financial and marketing data, and it tells you exactly what to do to hit your profit goals. It allows you to stop guessing on how much to spend on ads, what your ROAS needs to be, what happens if you run a discount, what happens if you raise prices, what happens if you add an expense, hire a person or fire a person. All the questions that I had to answer with crazy spreadsheets over the course of a decade, Pentane can answer for you in minutes. And man, if I had this back when we were starting BottleKeeper, who knows how much different that outcome could have been. So if you're running an e-commerce brand right now and you're making decisions based on gut feel instead of the actual numbers and math, I'd go give Pentane a try. Because as you've just seen, I've been through it all, and Pentane solves most of the issues I faced during my journey. Whenever you want to know what happens when you pull different levers inside your business, Pentane has the answers for you. So again, if you want to try it out, it'll be the first link in the description. And if you want to learn more about how to scale an e-commerce brand, then watch this video next.